Hi everyone, my name's Chris, and welcome to my channel, Northgarden Comics. Today's episode is part of a series I call My Comic Book Adventures, where I'll show you the good comics that I find for great prices at different shows, sales, and conventions. Today is part one of a two-part adventure where I'll start to show you these stacks of comics behind me that I picked up at a local show called the COMICCARD Show. Check it out. The books that I'm going to show you over the course of the next couple of videos actually come from a not so recent comic book adventure. And that's because with all that's going on in the world today, I'm not going out and having new live in-person comic book adventures, nor are there new live in-person comic book adventures to be had. But I figured, while I've only been making YouTube videos for a very short period of time, I've been going on comic book adventures for a very long time, so I have no shortage of material that I can share with you. So as we get ready to look at these books, let me set the stage for you. The name of the show, again, COMICCARD Show. They would usually hold 2 a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. It was called COMICCARD Shows because it was a combination of comics and sports cards and related merchandise. They would even have sports figures or comic book creators in attendance at the show, so you could do photographs, you could get autographs, things like that. And because of the presence of some of those sports and comic creators at the shows, there was a small fee to get into the show, usually $5 at the door as opposed to a lot of the other free shows that I go to, but the venue is still very similar. VFW, all in one room, not real glitzy and glamorous, just really focused on the creators, the comic books, and all of the various types of merchandise that you can get. As for the books that I'm going to show you today, I spent pretty much 50 cents on everything that you see in these two stacks. There's a few that were $1, and I think maybe 3 that cost me $1.50, but essentially everything was 50 cents a piece, because as I go to these shows, I'm always trying to find the best things that I can find for those low prices, 50 cents, $1, maybe $2, to fill in runs either by title or creator or character or storyline. So let's shift gears now and get to the books. The first 3 books that I'm going to show you were actually free. At the entrance to the show, they had grab bags for the first however many people came through the doors of the show, and in each grab bag you would have a couple free comics, some marketing materials, different advertisements, basically whatever the vendors wanted to donate to put in the grab bag. And I came away with 3 comic books. First one, Incredible Hulk number 454. I'm not a regular collector of the Hulk, but I do like this Adam Kubert cover, number 454. Ironman 226. This is part 2 of a 7-part story called Stark Wars. I wasn't collecting Iron Man, but as it works with much of my wish list, I'll get one part of a story, and then in this case, this was a popular story from the time, so I figured why not? I'll try to get the other issues now that I have this one for free. And then Universe X, number 1. This was number 1 of a 12-part series. Haven't read it, don't know much about it, other than it's a story based on notes from Alex Ross, based on a dystopian Marvel future, very common plotline. And there was a series that came before this called Earth X, and then one more series after this called Paradise X. But again, that was free. Now for the books that I actually purchased at the show. I've been a fan of the X-Men since the late 80s, early 90s, but I was reading titles like Excalibur, which I started in right at number 1. I was reading X Factor, and then I jumped in at number 1 with X-Men Volume 2, with that famous art by Jim Lee. But I wasn't collecting a lot of the Uncanny Xmen, except for a few issues that I had before, during, and then immediately following the Age of Apocalypse story from the mid-90s. And then the last handful of years, I've decided to grow that run and see if I could fill that in. And I've done that in chunks. I first started, I think I wanted to get issues 200 to 350, and then as I would find other blocks of the volume, I would expand that wish list and eventually expanded it all the way up to the end of the run at 544. And this issue here is actually what got me to my current point of wanting to have every single issue from the end of the Days of Future Past storyline until the end of the volume. And I say that because this issue, up until then, this was the lowest number I ever owned, and I bought it for 50 cents at the show. You can see it's got some ink transfer here that came from another comic book that was up against it. It wasn't bagged or boarded when I bought it, but it was only 50 cents, and it made me realize that maybe I can get some of those little bit lower numbers still really affordably. So as I record this today, from issues 143 to 544, there's only 2 single issues I need to have every comic in that run, but at the time that I purchased these, obviously there were a lot more holes in my run, so it was shows like this where you can find these good runs for 50 cents or $1 that really helped me to fill that in pretty quickly. So we'll kind of just cruise through some of these here. So we start with 147, big jump then to 223, 224, long shot cover and Havok, 225, 226, I believe was the first Uncanny X-Men comic that I had. So, but I wasn't reading it every month. So 225 right before it, 227 right after I didn't have, but I remember 226 being one of the first back issues I bought at a comic book store. 227, 228, part of the Executioner song story. Number 295, another jump. Then we go to 297, 298, 299. Again, these were all 50 cents a piece. 302, Ramita Jr. cover. 305, 306, 307, 308. This is an issue that gets highlighted on different comic book websites every year at Thanksgiving because it's a Thanksgiving issue for the Uncanny X-Men. So a little bit corny habit, but I've made it a habit of reading this one every Thanksgiving just for fun. This was a period where it was really hard to see the issue number. They actually hid it down here by the barcode, but this is number 329. I think cover there is Joe Madureira. Can't see on here. I think that's him. Oh yeah, there it is. Whoop, right there. Joe Madureira's art also makes me feel nostalgic because I started to really like his style back at this time and still like his style today. Although I think he's doing a lot more video game art from what I understand than comic book art. 333, 334. And I love the colors at this time period as well. Jean Grey's blue and yellow and the red. I don't know, just very cool looking. And this is another corny thing, but I remember this distinctly from around that Age of Apocalypse era when they started putting the X on there in that 3D kind of looking angle, computerized. And maybe that's when computers really started to get used more for comic art, but I remember that distinctly, and that stood out to me as a pretty cool thing in the box there. More Joe Madureira, 351. Jumping up to 383. And then some annuals. Again, 50 cents a piece. Annual number 7. Number 10. 17. And then this one didn't have a number. It just said annual 1998. Now we kind of jump ahead as well. As that wish list grew, I didn't just want Volume 1 of the Uncanny X-Men. This is an issue from Uncanny X-Men Volume 2, which I think ran for 20 issues. And this is obviously issue number 9. So just a random one there. Wolverine Saga, I had from years ago when it first came out, parts 1, 2, and 4 of that 4-part series. And I was missing book 3, so I found it for 50 cents. This is one... I was surprised when I opened it. I remember originally, you think it's going to be like a trade paperback. It's square bound. It's thicker, but it's more narrative and with some pictures supplemented in. And I think it's basically just summarizing Wolverine's history and his story. But I had parts 1, 2, 4, and I added part 3 for 50 cents just to complete that out. Shifting over to X Factor, I mentioned that's one of the titles I read more regularly at that time, but I didn't have every issue, and even when I went to this show, I still had some holes in the run, and I was able to fill in a couple of those. Number 32, I like that Cyclops and Thor cover. Here's a funny story. This costume of Cyclops, I was in high school at the time when he had this costume, and there was one Halloween that I dressed up as this Cyclops and went to school in a full one-piece blue, would you call it a unitard? I don't know, but it was spandex. And then I fashioned the big white X, and I wore, I think, Oakley blades, I think my sunglasses that I wore, as the visor. And the biggest shock of that entire story is that I did not get beat up, which is amazing to me. But I did that, and I'm sure there's a picture somewhere of that I would hope never gets uncovered, but that's a fun story from that time period. And then issue number 38, part of the Inferno story. These are kind of cool. These Amazing Adventures reprints of some of the early X-Men stories. Obviously, they don't have the value that an early X-Men would, but they're still kind of cool, and it reprints that art. I forget how many issues are in this original volume, but obviously here's number 7 that I picked up. Again, 50 cents. I also try to pick up some of these X-Men miniseries that came out, 80s, 90s kind of era. This was a 2-part story, X-Men and Alpha Flight. They're in really good condition. Pages are nice and white, 50 cents a piece, but they had both number 1 and number 2. And at the time, I was not really reading Avengers, but I wanted to start to collect some of the other stories, and this was obviously a very, very popular story from around, gosh, what was this, 2011? I'll have to check on that. But I didn't have the run, was it like 13, 14 issues or something in this? And so they had number 1 for just 50 cents. So I picked that up. I think I may have had it previously as a second print, but I was able to get it in a first printing. And then this is another one that I got mostly for nostalgia's sake. I had a bunch of these from this Update 89, really more of an encyclopedia type of a book where it just gives you descriptions of character by character. Kind of cool. It's not the kind of thing you just sit down and read for fun, but it's more of reference. But for 50 cents, kind of fun to add that and fill another hole in that run. Okay, well that's it for part 1 of this 2-part adventure, and next time when I come back we'll finish up with this second stack of books. In the meantime, if you have questions or comments, I'd love to see them down below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.